Right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Democratic Service Committee meeting on the 24th of September. We have a member of the public here, and we also got the Cabinet member, Sarah Jones. Can I have apologies, please?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from County Councillor Laura Jones and Francis Taylor.
Right. I'm in the public open forum now, and we have a member of the public here, and he would like to speak. Can you say your name, please?
Is this on? Okay. Yes, my name is David Farnsworth, Chair. Do you want me to say something now or wait till item 6, which I'm talking about item 6, actually? Shall I wait?
Yes.
Okay.
You wait till 6, yeah. Right, position of the minutes, you'll notice it down the last item, as that's what we're going to try and do. Item 5 is the mobile phones. Do you want to come in here, John?
So we've had a couple of discussions around mobile phones and what the actual cost of everything would be if we were to supply them through the council. The current position is we don't supply mobile phones, obviously, to councillors, but you've got a telephone through your Surface Pros that you've been issued with. The report states all the information on the costs of procuring the handsets and monthly costs of mobile phone contracts through the council's procurement process. They're not that good, really, considering we'd be taking out 43 contracts. The cost that you can get through the procurement process is worse than you can get by walking into a shop yourselves and taking a contract out, which isn't very good, really. The additional issues with council procured contracts is we're given a set handset. There's a cost of that at £115, and again, you can walk into a shop and get that free if you took out a contract. It's not a handset you'd all be familiar with. It's a handset none of the team are familiar with. So you might have issues if we look to take out a contract on that. I think there'd be a big learning curve for everybody if we were gonna try and use it. And if I'm honest, I think we'd have a lot of backlash afterwards saying it's not good enough. But that's what we've got, and we'd be stuck with it. So really, just there's information there. We've got a single provider, EE. It might work for some of you. It might not work for others of you. So some of you, it might not work at all. But that's what the procurement contract would be. If you just go to option 5, we've got the options appraisals that we could look at, or what you want to consider today. Do nothing. We either keep the VPN licenses that you've got on the phones and your Surface Pros, but we do some more training around how you can use that, and you've got the pros and cons of it there. The biggest issue obviously being that you need a Wi-Fi connection to be able to actually use the phone. But it does tap straight into the council's directory. We can go through the procurement contract and get everybody mobile phones through the procurement, but obviously the costs are expensive for what it is you're actually getting, and you've got the handset issues that we've already mentioned, and as well as the network issues. Or we could look to reimburse an element of members' costs to mobile phones in line with what you could get if you walked into a phone shop and took a contract out yourself. I think on balance and looking at everything, the preferred option that if we were going to look at it would be that we would reimburse councillors for a SIM-only package, so you can use whatever handset you want. You could walk into any provider that you want that covers your area best. They'll give you a SIM to put in whatever phone you want to use. a package that's similar to a contract package that we could give you. And we would look to just reimburse you, say, around £10 a month, something like that, or just cover whatever that SIM-only cost is. It gives you more flexibility in your provider, the device you use, etc. But you would need your own devices to be able to put that SIM into. So they're the options, but I'll pass it over to you for any comments and open the debate up.
Right, members, you've heard what John had to say. Anybody want to respond to that? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think option 5 is a good one, because we can actually gain a little bit more knowledge about the Cisco on the computer, and that wouldn't incur any additional expense. I mean, I'm quite happy using my own mobile phone. I've only got a pay-as-you-go contract, and it works quite well. What I am curious to know is the outcome of the survey. There was an online survey, but I could only find 2 responses to it.
Yeah, that's what we had.
Oh, okay. Yes. I think it was Joe and myself. We were
Yeah, I think on that it was a 50-50 split of
yeah, and I did.
Anybody else? Tudor?
Yeah, thanks, John, for looking into this. I'm just surprised how costly it is, because you would think, normally any sort of, as a big provider, but providing 43 mobile phones is a decent chunk of business. I'm just a bit taken aback how bad the offering is, and obviously from one provider. I think it's a difficult issue, because more and more now, for example, you need really a mobile phone to have your code, the second layer of security, to access this. If I'm, at home or elsewhere, I've got a mobile phone. But if I, for example, was one of the few people who didn't have a mobile phone, then I wouldn't be able to access that code other than through, say, my home phone number. And sometimes I might be working elsewhere. As a matter of principle, I do feel we're a little bit under sort of provided in terms of the sort of technology. I know we've got this, but as you say, if you're not linked up to Wi-Fi, and if you're out on your ward, other than sticking an antenna on your head, you're not going to pick it up, are you? Plus the fact you say the SIM only, but if I wanted to do that, I have got my own personal mobile phone, which I don't really want to give that number out, to all and sundry. If I had to buy a phone, then there is obviously a cost implication there. I know the SIM then you would possibly reimburse. I think it's a bit unclear cut. I don't know how other people feel at the moment. I don't want to put MCC to a huge cost. And I know perhaps possibly some of my problems are where I live, which is not in a good sort of connectivity area. We haven't got good broadband, etc. But I feel increasingly frustrated at times not being able to access things, or if I'm out and about. And I don't feel it's up to me to use my mobile phone and my contract minutes to phone ward members. I'm sure somebody working for MCC would not want to do that. I don't want to go out of pocket. I'm quite happy to do things, but I just think it's still pretty unclear. That would be my feeling.
I was just wondering, why don't we have like a training session on using apps such as WhatsApp, Facebook? Obviously, I have my political profile on Facebook, and you can FaceTime people, but not actually FaceTime, you can face call. So it's non-chargeable. Maybe a training session for some members who don't know how you can use those free apps. Just a suggestion.
Joe?
Likewise with Tudor, I was really surprised, badly surprised, about how much it would actually cost to provide all of that support. Just from the cost of those contracts was just very, very disappointing to see. My issue with using this is that I don't have it turned on all the time. So I have to turn it on to know that somebody has phoned me. So it's not a telephone. It's a computer which can connect to a telephone line. So this morning I had a phone call from a lady in my ward. My computer wasn't on. She rang my mobile phone, which is the number I have to put out there. So I have to give my mobile phone number to everybody across Monmouthshire. So I'm not terribly happy with that, but it's currently that's the only option I have, because otherwise I am not in contact with my residents. So I don't feel very comfortable with that as the alternative. I would much rather have a separate phone number which is only going to be for council business. But likewise, as Tudor has also said, I don't have a spare mobile phone which I could have a SIM go into. We could wait another 2 years until my contract expires, and then if the phone is still working, then I could do that, but otherwise I'll have to go out and buy another phone. But I do actually think that it's actually for a safety perspective and a separation of life and work idea, because we're not meant to be permanently available. So if a Caldecott number ever comes through on my phone, which is not somebody in my phone book, I have to not answer it, because if it's not in my council hours, I have to let it go to voicemail and then see who it is and then ring the person back. So because you need to be able to monitor what information is coming through. Whereas if it was a number coming through on a council-only phone, then it's very definitely this is my council work. It will be answered when I'm doing my council work. And so you can manage to keep that balance of separation between personal life and when you are available for your residents as well. So I still am of the opinion that we ought to have phones, because I think, and it ought to be a council-enabled one. I don't necessarily think it needs to, I'm wondering, is there any other options we can look at which are cheaper in order to do that? So are there any other ideas, or is that literally it? There's no other options?
Like you say, we've got the phone through the computer, a full-on phone contract, or the SIM-only option. So with the SIM-only option, it would be a SIM card that is a separate number. But then obviously you do need your other device to be able to put it into. So it would be a number that you could only use for council business if you wanted to, and have it separate, but you then have two phones. So there's nothing here that's going to please everybody. You know, we could look at giving everybody a device that we could get a good deal on, that everybody's got the same thing, but it's not going to suit everybody either. The training's a good idea, but the level that some councillors are using their devices is massively different. So some some can just about turn it on. Some are using it really good. So we've got a big, you know, whatever we do here isn't going to please everybody. We've got people who are using My Monmouthshire out and about, so you need data to be able to send photos and everything like that in. We've got some who, you know, like you say, logging on now with the computers needing a text message. They're the old flip front phones they've dug out from somewhere. So they're all the options that we can do. There's no way of mixing in either of them either. The only thing that we might be able to look at on terms of the handsets is whether we've got any contracts finishing corporately that we could slowly roll out as they come into the end of their contracts. But that would be drip fed then, as and when a contract expires and we've got an old handset, we might be able to bring something new in. But again, that device is already a couple of years old. So how good is that going to be for you then going forward as an old device that might not work? Again, it's finding the needs and the balance for everybody.
Tudor?
Is there any possibility? You know, I've got my own, personal mobile phone, which I just went in and bought it online, and then I've got a SIM-only package, which is quite cheap with 3, and it suits my personal use. But would it be possible to sort of buy, you know, the required number of handsets, just buy them, and then obviously go into a contract situation for them, you know, for the SIM? Because I do agree with County Councillor Joe Watkins. The delineation, I don't want to give my mobile phone out and I could be on holiday in France and it rings. Certainly when I worked for a national organisation, they provide us with a mobile phone so that, you know, obviously we use that for the business element, etc. And you knew if anybody rang you, it was business. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't for personal use. And on, was it last Thursday, we had the feedback with the Chief Executive, Paul Matthews, and he said, well, yeah, you should delineate between work and when you're not, as it were, in work. You're not expected to be on call 24 hours a day. And some people are getting a bit stressed out about that, of not being able to switch off from their council duties. So, you know, I feel deep down, as a matter of principle, really, that we should be provided with a device, plus the fact that we're always talking in this meeting about greater engagement, greater response, you know, to ward members, and to do that, you've got to have the apparatus to do it, you know. And I'm not for 1 minute saying we go with those contracts, because they seem extremely expensive. I was quite sort of, yeah, gobsmacked, really. I mean, I think I could go into anywhere today and find out something a lot better for less money. And I want good value for money for myself. I also want it for the authority. So I do think the current situation is not a brilliant one, and, you know, I would like to see things move on a little bit.
Would members be happy then if I go away, see if we can do anything on devices, and we're happy with the SIM only possibility off the back of it. My only concern with it is we're not going to dive straight into it. We'll go away, see what devices are available, and bring them back to make sure they're suitable, because that's going to be the ultimate issue. If we can't use the phones, then this whole process is pointless. So I can do that if you want me to.
Matt, do you want to come in?
No, Chair, it was pretty much to say exactly the same point that John had made there. So, yeah, to me it makes sense. I've got a few deals up on my laptop here, and it's clear that, unfortunately, the price you can get as individuals is sometimes better value than we appear to be able to procure at a whole authority levels. There will be reasons behind that, but I'm not a procurement expert, so I won't attempt to go into those. But SIM only, it would allow you that delineation between two roles, and as John's identified, there could be some different options around the handset that you can plug those into. And I think a lot of us carry two mobile phones these days. I certainly do for work and personal. And as they get slimmer, it becomes less of an issue.
Are you all happy then for John to go away and come? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's got to be the councillor's personal choice. I mean, I would not want to be carrying two phones around, I'll be honest with you. I do everything on one, and I think it would be a lot less complicated to have. I'm happy to carry on using my own, but I think at the end of the day, if you do go down that road, it should be individual councillor's choice.
That's off the back of it, that's another thing we're thinking of, in that we'd be giving benefits to some councillors, financial benefits of having a mobile phone. If you don't want one, you'd be losing out on that money as well. So it's how do we set that off? It's just something to think about.
I've got to agree with what Matt and John have said. I think that makes a great deal of sense. Let's look at buying handsets and then having a separate contract for SIM only. But we can't race into this. There is a cost implication, and obviously we are in straitened times of finance. So I'd be the last one to say, oh yeah, we want to do that. I would be quite happy having two phones. Always had them in the past when I worked. I had my own personal one and work, so it wouldn't make any odds to me. But that makes common sense, and let's do that as far as I'm concerned.
You're all happy with that, then, that John goes away and comes back, and perhaps he can report back to us on the next meeting in December? Yeah? Right, thank you. Right, item 6 is to increasing the involvement in local democracy subgroup update. Do you wish to come in now? Well, I'm quite welcome you coming in.
My name is David Farnsworth. I've lived in the county for 30 years, and I happen to have a professional background in corporate management in both the private and public sectors. I've read some of the papers to the committee, including items 6 and 7 on the agenda, and I simply thought I'd come along today to give support to what you and your officers are trying to do by highlighting a few points, if I may, from the entirely from the community point of view. This is where I'm coming from. Some of the points I make are in the papers that you have. Some are new, I think. My understanding is that you feel that the current arrangements to promote democracy and public involvement are ineffective. That's what I read. It's my experience that to be effective, the committee and the council will need to provide the community with two basic things. One is a clear administrative process for us being involved, and secondly, a minimum quality of information that we need. And I'd just very briefly like to illustrate those two things. The administrative process, we need to know exactly where, when and how we are being invited to participate. Nearly all projects or policies go through a similar decision-making process before the council takes a decision. We need to see where we fit into that process, and I've got 4 examples of that. Number 1, knowing when projects are initiated. I've spoken to the public forum at the Strong Community Select Committee before on how difficult it is for members of the public to find out when projects arise and to see the timeline for their progress. It's almost impossible, actually. Number 2, we need to be clear which projects you want us to be involved in. Projects with a big impact, where value can be added, and so on. And I think that your papers actually raises that point. Number 3, being clear whom you want to be involved. Public consultation based on, which is very often actually based on one-off, drop-in exhibitions with random members of the public attending, simply does not work. The sample of opinion is far too small, is not based on consensus, and does not cover a cross-section of the population to be any kind of guide, I would have thought, to your decisions. We have to think of which population is impacted and how we obtain a truly representative sample of those. And number 4, giving the opportunity to discuss ideas and options at an early stage before a preferred option is chosen, or a policy. So often consultation consists of asking for reactions from the public to a proposal that has already been decided. A great put-off, I have to say, to members of the public. So my second heading, the minimum quality of information. So that was all to do with the administrative process, that we need to understand where our place is in that process. Number 2, in my kind of 2 requirements, is what I'm calling a minimum quality of information available to members of the public. This is key to enabling the public to examine and discuss the evidence for a project or a policy, rather than give knee-jerk, preconceived or polarized views, which is very easy to do. But I guess you're wanting the public to look at the evidence. Again, if I can illustrate that with examples, I've got 5 examples. Number 1, exactly what the proposal is and what you're aiming to achieve. That may seem very obvious, but it so often surprises me that it's never made clear. Number 2, what options are available and which are simply not feasible. We all tend to run away with grand ideas, don't we? Certainly members of the public like me do. But they have to be feasible. Number 3, what criteria should be used to choose between options? One of the problems we find with many council reports is that several different appraisals with different criteria seem to be used all at the same time. Well-being, health assessments, equality, sustainability, etc., etc. I've seen several reports with different pages at the back with different appraisals, and it's not clear which one's being used, if any of them. Number 4, whatever the appraisal criteria are, actually using those criteria to choose the preferred option. The worry is that appraisal tables are being ticked in a token way after the preferred option has been chosen, rather than being the reason for choosing that option in the first place. So, you know, and the appraisal thing is so critical, by the way, from the members of the public point of view, because that's a very good place, a very good vehicle for people to get involved in the decision. And finally, informing participants of your decision and how our views have had an effect. Or if not, why not? This is absolutely fundamental to public confidence in any participation process. So really, basically, all I'm saying is I applaud the work of your committee and your officers to improve the way you involve members of the public in the council's decision-making. Having a clear process and supplying the right quality of information, in my experience, are key. It need not take more time and resources, which is the worry when resources are decreasing, as you know. As one of your own papers says, cutbacks mean that it is increasingly essential to keep the public on side. We just have to get the basics right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to come in there, Matt?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Farnsworth. I feel my work here is done. I don't think there's anything in terms of what you said there that I would disagree with. And as this committee is aware, this is something through the subgroup we've been looking to explore, which has culminated in the series of recommendations before you today. As an authority, I think we recognise, the subgroup recognised, and it's an issue that's been discussed in this committee. Forward planners haven't been sufficiently forward. They need to be so if you're to identify at an early enough stage those contentious decisions, those decisions that have a real impact on communities that we want to involve people in. Myself and John had this discussion at senior leadership team last week, and there is a renewed appetite and recognition of the importance of that. So we're going to be looking for closer working, pushing for those items to be on planners much earlier. Developing, which is in this report, one of the things we're asking you to look at, to identify those consistent criteria that can be used so that where we, as a council, assess the projects which should go into the public domain for more extensive involvement, and I use the word involvement as opposed to consultation, that we can highlight those. And it is that distinction, you know, Mr. Farnsworth has highlighted it quite well. Being involved at an early enough stage to influence and help shape something, as opposed to commenting on a paper which is pretty much written and finalised and will be going for decision in 2 weeks. Issues around quality of report writing. Again, I think we make reference in here, you should be able to tell fairly early on as a member of the public or as an elected member with the thousands of pages you have to read every year, what it is that paper is asking and proposing. That's where, as officers, we have to be much better and more concise with the reports. In particular, that key purpose section up front that lets you know what the report is doing and what you can expect of it. So we need to build in better quality assurance. And that isn't and can't be down to John's team, Nicola and the Democratic Services officers. That needs to sit with senior management, senior leadership team and the directorate management teams, because they're the ones that know the detail of the issue. Whether it be Nicola or Wendy or Richard, they can look at a report and let us know if a section's missing, but then they can't really do that assessment as whether it presents a clear argument based on the legislation or the needs of the community. So I think this is a very timely attendance at the public open forum. It is something I think we all recognise that we need to get better at. And in terms of the paper, there are a few recommendations here. There are those criteria which you'll see in the body of the report at para 3.3 for discussion and debate. Are they the right things? That this committee does take overview of those issues where we feel there should be more extensive public involvement and applies those criteria. That sits both in terms of your role with promoting democratic engagement, but also acting as a sort of coordinating role for business across the council. And that, thirdly, you approve some minor changes to the report template to improve the structure of those. Now, I'll say a little bit more about that because we haven't discussed it extensively. But there is an evaluation template that's appended to reports. It was added last September, and that's about the numeric sort of evaluation as opposed to the equality impact and sustainability dimensions. Looking back at those reports, it doesn't appear to have added a huge amount of value, and I think has led to some confusions where we appear to have two separate evaluation documents at the end. So what we're proposing is to abandon after 1 year the use of that evaluation template, to really focus in on the quality of the future generations template, which has the equality impact assessment, and then to ensure that the evaluation activity is properly wrapped up within a clear and well-written paragraph, which is challenged. And I'll come on to this at item 7 on evaluation of decisions, that we do actually look back to and see whether we've, for want of a better phrase, done what we set out to on the tin in the first place. Did we deliver what we set out to achieve? John, from your perspective, any sort of key points that you'd want to emphasise around that to inform the discussion? So, Chair, with your permission, just sort of open for questions and debate.
Just over to the members. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. The 3 Abergavenny members here this afternoon were all elected to this august body at the same time. And in Abergavenny, and I guess it's probably the same throughout the county, it's been a really interesting time in terms of local projects that have been going forward. So in Abergavenny, we've seen the pedestrianisation of the centre, and it's been really interesting being a contributor to the discussions around that. And I've seen a genuine commitment from officers of the county council to come and work with people from local organisations, be it Chamber of Trade or Team Abergavenny, where there is expertise around planning and architecture and so on. And I think that's something that we should always be looking to develop. And as I say, it's something I found really very interesting. Having said that, I was slightly disappointed at last week's county council meeting, where the latest exciting project to hit Abergavenny is the development of the hub. And I raised some questions there on behalf of an individual in Abergavenny who represents an organisation. And one of those was around, well, why was there no discussion at the area forum, the area committee, which would have provided an excellent place for members of the community to come along and state their case. So it was disappointing to hear the senior officer who would have done that just say, well, there was a lot on the agenda, so I didn't go. Sorry, yes, Matt, go on.
Can I just pick up on that, just to clarify on that? I think Deb Hill-Howells, the officer in question there, had offered to attend, but was advised that the agenda was full and therefore she wasn't able to attend. it wasn't that it was her choice not to attend.
I'm not necessarily blaming her, but somebody needs to be blamed, whether it's the chair of the committee or whatever, because that was a huge way in which someone with a lot of facts at her fingertips could have been questioned, could have made a really important contribution. So I'm not for 1 minute saying it's a specific person's fault, but I think that is a really useful way in which conversations that involve the local community can take place, whether it was the officer, whether it was the chair, whether it was Democratic Services putting together an agenda that was so long it became meaningless. I don't know, but we need to look at things like that, because I think that the way the pedestrianisation has gone, with local groups working in tandem very positively together, has actually set us a very effective yardstick for measuring things like that into the future. And I think it was disappointing that while that's going on, we've got the converse sometimes as well.
Judah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd agree with Councillor Grocott there. I mean, since we've come into, as it were, office, the three county councillors represented here today, there have been lots of major projects, and obviously the public realm work, in particular. And there are people there from enhancing the environment. Lots of people have got lots of expertise and are confident enough to put their point of view. But at the same time, I think we need to go sort of a strata down as well, because in a sense, obviously, public consultation is public consultation. It's not just people who think, well, I was a former whatever in the authority or in another authority. That's my view. That should be taken account of, as opposed to, somebody who lives in that town and who's got probably more of a layman's view on it. And I think that then is probably more difficult. I welcome everything that's been said in the public forum today. I think it makes a great deal of sense. We're in challenging times. We're going in more into challenging times in terms of finance and with big projects. And when we're spending, the authority spending quite large amounts of money, within reason, we must be fulfilling the sort of needs and wants of the people within Monmouthshire County Council. And consulting with them is important. I note on the paper about putting it on the website, etc. For some people, and I know obviously younger generations coming through, they're very ICT literate and they will look at that, etc. But I think for some people who are not quite as competent in that area, or perhaps don't have the devices, I think we've got to think of a slightly broader range of ways of informing people, and whether that's through perhaps local press or the electronic notice boards in the towns, to say, look, this is what the thought is. At the end of the day, as an authority, we do want to obviously involve the public. They are the people who are paying the council tax, which pays for these projects and pays for the authority. So I think involvement is a key issue coming from, and this is the committee which in a sense drives it. I totally agree with this sort of better forward planning, telling people what's going to come and giving them an opportunity to comment. And then when the project goes through, telling them, well, why a particular decision's been taken, the rationale, the information, so that people feel confident that, yeah, they have been listened to, but perhaps on this occasion there are better reasons for taking a slightly different course of action. So it's quite a complex area, isn't it, of involving people. Democracy is hard work. Dictatorship is relatively easy. Not that I'm advocating that, but personally, I want to see more public involvement. I know the three of us here represent Abergavenny, do spend a lot of time listening to people, passing on views, etc. But I think it's got to go more than, it's got to go wider than that.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for coming to talk to us. Much appreciated. Obviously, I sit on the subgroup, and so some of my ideas are already in the document, which is lovely to see. Thank you very much. So one of the things I would like to kind of highlight maybe for the benefit of the rest of the committee is the idea of the website and engagement and how that actually ties into our reports that we see regularly in council, with the idea of the front training officers better into how to write the opening paragraph of those reports so that it would be readable by members of the public, so that they can then literally read that first sentence and they'll be able to understand that today in Children and Young Persons Committee, we looked at school attendance, and they'd be able to see the summary there. So our reports will start to become, have a simpler explanation, and that can also then translate into the website idea and the public engagement aspect, with the idea that though we learn to speak in plain English a little bit more rather than in council jargon, which is definitely a barrier to engagement for members of the public. I've been fortunate in terms of the work I do in Caldecott in having seen some very good public engagement. We've recently had the green infrastructure deal with a large sum of money coming to Caldecott, and there was a very good means of trying to actually get different groups involved to actually directly really give input. And we ended up having people from Keep Wales Tidy, we had people from the community garden, as well as local members and other volunteers from within the town as well. And so we actually did get a good number, but it was quite hard work getting all of those people into a room to actually be able to talk. So as Tudor said, it is actually quite hard work to do this democracy business. But I did actually see how it worked. And because of my involvement with a volunteering group in Caldecott, I'm managing to keep the level of interest in that project going whilst we wait for the money and the actual project to come forward. So it also takes, as well as the actual engagement, it also then takes continued engagement to keep the public's attention, because things happen slowly in councils. We might have the idea at one stage, and as you said, the timescale can then be a very long time for the public's attention. We don't make a decision one week and then the money arrives the following week. It can take 6 months, it can take 12 months. And so actually managing to find a way to keep that engagement going is going to be one of our challenges as well. But it's something that I think we need to also pay some attention to as to how we can actually do that. So the other thing, Lisa and I were talking just before the meeting about the Made Open platform, and the fact that it doesn't seem to be very functional yet. It doesn't have a great deal of engagement. And Councillor Dimmock suggested that Cornwall seems to have an active Made Open platform. And we wondered about reaching out to that council and asking, how did they make it work? How did they actually get that involvement and that engagement? And that actually might be a really good way to try and learn some good practice from another council which has actually been doing some things, because it seems a real shame that we're putting some investment and some time into this particular aspect of our engagement, and it doesn't seem to be fulfilling what we want it to do yet. So is there any chance we can have a look at that a little bit more? Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say at the moment. Thank you.
Perhaps we should take a trip down there. Lisa.
This is for the officers. In your experience, how have you found using that Made Open platform with engaging with residents? Because I know using social media, I can engage with my residents, but it's a habit that you get into broadcasting rather than actually engaging, and it's trying to find something that complements it really. And I had a look on Made Open, and it didn't seem to be getting much of an audience really, but I did notice Cornwall was acting really well. They were doing very well. They had lots of residents engaging, and how we can take it from them and get it to work for us here in Monmouthshire.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. There's quite a few points there. If I can just sort of pick off, going back to perhaps Councillor Thomas's points. We're actually mindful, I think it's para 3.5 in the report. I probably am a little bit tech heavy in the wording there. And you're absolutely right. You know, we can't lose sight of people reading local newspapers, getting things via other mechanisms. So we will put together a toolkit of different techniques and approaches that people can apply in different situations. And You know, that includes harder to reach sections of the community. It's all too easy for us to think we can solve it by putting on a website. That doesn't hit everyone. And really important to us in all of this is getting that diversity of views. If we're seeking new ideas and new thinking, you need a diversity of views. And we're blessed in Monmouthshire with some incredible people. You know, we have high levels of social capital. We have an incredible professional base. It would be remiss of us not to reach out to those, but also those broader views within the community to represent all sections. Yeah, Councillor Watkins, thank you. It's been great to have that involvement of all members in that subgroup. So I think it means you can sort of gather around a table and have conversations which can be a little more expansive with the luxury of time that you don't always get in a committee. And then on the point of Made Open, yes, I look enviously at Cornwall, not least because we started this Made Open platform with a company based in Cornwall. It's subsequently been bought by local authorities in Cornwall, in Bristol, by community development organisations, and by local authorities in Australia. We've certainly been on a journey with it and some learning, and I absolutely recognise the comments you say, because we believe it's something that fits incredibly well and could work well in Monmouthshire if we find the right way to do it. Were over the summer, we were quite lucky that the founder of the company, Robert Wolfe, came and paid us a visit. Councillor Sarah Jones, you met with Robert Wolfe. So just to give people a flavour of what that was, he came up, spent 2 or 3 days here at his own expense. We didn't pay him consultancy. He came up in his VW camper van and slept in his camper van in Councillor Brian Jones's place up the road. And using his own petrol, travelled around the county, meeting different partners and understanding what it would take to make that a success, what we would need to do differently. Because what they found in Cornwall and in Bristol, in other places where this is worked, is a higher degree of community ownership rather than local authority. But sometimes when these things are perceived as local authority, it can be a barrier. Because actually, what we pay for that platform and investment is relatively speaking quite small. The difficulty is in the amount of energy you have to put into it. So actually, we would be prepared to maintain that licence fee and gift that platform to a community organisation if we could find a way to do that in an inclusive way. So Robert Wolfe and Councillor Jones, I'm not sure whether you want to say anything, but he's come back with some recommendations for us. It sits within Sharon Lloyd's team, Partnership and Community Development. We're going to look at those recommendations, and perhaps that could be something we could bring back to you for further discussion.
You want to come in, sir?
Yeah, I won't add much because Matt's very well articulated what the outcome of that was, is that there are a number of recommendations that have come forward. We had a series of engagement activity with Robert over the summer just to understand how we could make better use of that platform. I think the key thing, which may be quite a self-evident thing, is that we can't take that forward in isolation. It has to be done as a consortium effort with the community. And so that's sitting with, as Matt has said, with Sharon's team. So I suppose I'd propose that we come back to a future meeting if you'd allow us to put that on the work programme, to present the ideas, because I think as a platform it's a fantastic way to engage. Obviously won't cover everyone, but it's one very, very important route, but it needs to clearly be improved because we're not getting the best out of it. And so I think it's an important point that Councillor Dimmock's raised, and yeah, if you'll have us back, we'll come back and report back on what we will do to take that forward.
Thank you. You're always welcome. Is there any more questions on this? Sorry, Councillor Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chair. Just to sort of reiterate what Joe said about the subgroup, it's good to see. I mean, we've had lots of discussions within that group, and it's good to see this the way it's working. And I'm really pleased to see the reference to the area committee, because I think that is a very important. Has a very important role in all of this. The North Monmouthshire, formerly the Brindlecombe Area Committee, at each of the meetings has one, Owen Wills, the Community Development Officer, brings along or invites somebody from the voluntary organisations, and we've had several presentations. And it works both ways, because when the volunteers know we're interested, they go out and tell their groups. And I think this is a really important part of the area committee, where we communicate with as many people as possible. We started with the voluntary groups, maybe we can expand on that, but this is all something that we can look at in the subgroup. I think small steps, just letting people know that we're there and we're listening.
Thank you. When is the next meeting, Matt, for the subgroup?
Don't think we've got anything in the diary at the moment, so we'll look to set something up.
If there's nothing else on item 6, we go on to item 7. Over to you again, Matt.
Chair, before we do, can I just check sort of broadly that members are satisfied with the recommendations in in item 6? I'm sensing from the way the discussion went that people were, but just as a matter of formality.
Can we have that, confirm that? Can we show our hands in, please? Thank you. No one, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And I suppose dovetails almost into the previous report. Just as a bit of a recap on a couple of issues. A little bit of the context for this. I'll ground back in a Wales Audit Office report from March 2017. When they made a proposal, not a statutory recommendation, but almost their sort of fourth tier of advice, that we set out at the point of decision of service changes, how the impact will be measured and monitored. From September of 2017, we added a new section to the report template, which was evaluation. I mentioned that earlier, and there was an appendix which has not proved the best way, but I think the principle of setting out clearly how we expect something to be evaluated and when we expect it to be evaluated is the right one. We're now at the point 1 year on from that where we can expect those first tranche of evaluations to come back through. The danger being for all of us is that if everything gets evaluated, the business of committees, council and cabinet is clogged up looking at all the evaluations for everything we looked at a year ago or 18 months ago. So this paper proposes a way of dealing with that, which is, broadly speaking, we start to capture when decisions are made the evaluation date as part of some forward planning arrangements. That list is then made available to the decision maker, to the chairs of Select Committee, to the chair of Democratic Services Committee, and also the cabinet member for governance as part of the governance and decision-making role. And those groups, in particular the chairs of Select Committee, have the option to call in any of those evaluations. You have a list of what has been evaluated, a couple of lines to give you a sense of what that says, but then the option to look at any of those in more detail is based on whether or not that feels an appropriate decision for the committee. I think we need to establish some criteria around that. They'll be different, I think, from the criteria for involvement, but we're looking essentially at those issues where there has been a change to policy or an impact on the public, where we would be looking back to, has this had the desired impact? If it was cost savings, has it delivered the desired cost savings? Not replicating budget reports, and we wouldn't evaluate monitoring reports or information items. It would be where there had been changes to policy or service. And then alongside that, and I think this is something we would need to work through with members of Audit Committee, as to whether a single body, perhaps Audit Committee, takes an overview of those evaluations from time to time, perhaps twice a year, just to assess whether the process is operating effectively. And that would sit then with, for example, Audit Committee as part of their overview for ensuring the continuous improvement and the performance management arrangements, I should say, of the authority. So, Chair, what we're sort of asking for today is members to discuss that proposed approach, to identify any issues they feel the paper hasn't covered, which are pertinent to the debate, and that the committee then endorses the proposed approach, subject to any amendments to it agreed today.
Right, thank you. It's open to the members. Joe?
It seems to make pretty good sense to me. Obviously, we haven't seen any of these evaluations yet, so it's difficult to know exactly how that will actually plan out when we actually get our reports through. But the fact that the chairs can look in detail to see whether it needs to go back to a select and that audit will get a complete overview seems very sensible. Yeah, it seems a good way forwards.
I would agree. I think it's like another backstop, really, isn't it? I think it's useful to have that sort of evaluative process for chairs of select and for audit, so that there is a clear path then. I know there is a clear path now, but I think it's just putting an extra level there, which I think is worthwhile, and it is good in terms of democracy, really, isn't it? It's showing that we are carefully looking back as well, and it is approved by chairs of select and audit. So I think it's a good move myself.
Anybody else? No? So can we approve the recommendations then? 2122. Show of hands? Right, thank you. Right, number 8 is the Democratic Week. John?
Yeah, it's just to inform members of what we'll be doing for Local Democracy Week. You've all had an excuse me. You've all had an email off me regarding your availability for some democracy days we're looking to put on in the primary schools, and some information around the secondary schools. But just to summarise, we'll be looking to send a county councillor into the primary schools for a day to work with their school councils. If you can, check your diaries. That'll be the 19th of October. So if you are available, please do get back to me. Schools are coming forward, willing to get involved. So we'll be putting together a pack for you all to take into the schools and just start to build up those relationships. In terms of the secondary schools, we're asking them to produce a short 5-minute video on votes at 16 and to try and change the council's policy position on allowing votes at 16, as well as how best we can engage them in the democratic process earlier. They'll all be presented at CYP on the 18th of October, I think it is, with them choosing the best and strongest argument and them allowing them to present it at council the following week to all members. So it's just an update. That's what it is. But if you are available and willing to get involved, then please get in touch.
Yes, Lisa.
Are we going to invite the children to chambers like we did last year?
So the plan is that they'll do the secondary schools will do their videos, then whoever presents the strongest argument will come into full council to present their argument to full council. After that, then we can build on it. It shouldn't just be Democracy Week, really, should it? We should be doing something all the time, a rolling program of bringing people in. Like we've got the young farmers, for example, use the chamber for 2 days in November and December and fill it out. They fill this floor on the weekends. And have a really good day. Sarah will know more about it than I would. But I think if we can do more as a rolling programme, but we need a starting point.
Sorry, yeah, and just briefly to add, it's a little bit of an aside. It just happens to fall during that week. I've been working with the campaign Show Racism the Red Card, and they've got their Give Racism the Red Card Day that Friday during that week, which is the 19th. and we're working with them to have an event with some of the schools, a football event on the evening of the 16th. So I'm sure we'll make all members aware if you've got any young people in your own wards that want to get involved in that. But that's specifically during Democracy Week, and it's engaging people around that topic and trying to raise the profile of what that organisation's doing. So, and like John has just said, going forward, it's how we continue that engagement with our young people and with our residents, you know, going back to the previous items, throughout the year, not just during Democracy Week. So this is a useful platform to build on during that week of events.
We need all the support we can get for that week. I know that I was nominated to go into Juicer School in Caldicot, unknowns to me, but I will do it. And we want more volunteers to go into the other schools, north and south.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to make out, I sent my apologies for that meeting, but they haven't been noted on the minutes.
Righto, we'll make that as an amendment. Can somebody propose and second that the minutes are correct? Councillor Woodhouse. Yes, so, Councillor Woodhouse and John Watkins. Right. If you're lucky, I might fit some mince pies in. Thank you. Thank the member of the public, please, for coming in. Your input is valued because it gives us a chance to see what the public are thinking, and the ideas they fetch in. It helps us to go along in the committee.
Thank you for saying so, Chair.